Hey everyone, I've just received my Nikon Zfc mint color, which is like a Tiffany blue, and it's a beautiful camera to look at. You know, even if I wasn't taking photos on it, I'm pretty sure I would want this just because it's so retro. I grew up taking photos. I started taking photos with black and white film and developing prints in a darkroom, and so this retro camera really appeals to me, and I know it appeals to a lot of people, but I do want it to be useful as well. And the reason that I purchased this camera is because a lot of the time when I'm wandering around, I want to have a camera on me, something with a very small lens. So I've got this lens, the 16 to 50, the silver one that comes with the Zfc in a kit. And I can just throw this in my handbag, have it in my camera bag, and be ready to take photos that I can use in my stock collection and I can create composites from. So in that way, it's great. I also do a lot of behind the scenes videos, and what I really love about this camera is the flip out screen. It's fully articulating. It gives me the ability to see what I'm filming and to make sure that I am framed correctly and I'm in focus. So it's great in that respect, especially for people like me that are sort of out on the field solo. So I got the camera for those two reasons primarily, for video behind the scenes and to have a nice little small camera in my bag. But I want it to run like my Z6 and my Z7. I want to be able to pick up all my cameras and have them feel very comfortable in my hands and have all the same things happening so that I don't get confused or I don't miss a shot. Now, it wasn't as easy to set this up as I thought because it's being created in a very unique way, especially with these dials on the top and the way that you can actually run this camera like it's one of those old film cameras with these dials. But you can also set it up like your other Z cameras. I'm going to take you through my setup, and hey, this might be different for you, but hopefully there are some aspects in here that help you set up your Zfc and customize it the way that you like to work. So let's get started. First of all, this camera has dials on the top for ISO, for shutter speed, and you use a dial on the front generally for aperture. Now you can set it to manual mode, aperture priority, which is A, shutter speed priority, and P and auto. Now I like to shoot in manual mode, and I generally like to use auto ISO. But what if you like to switch between auto ISO and manual ISO? What if you like to use auto ISO and exposure compensation? As you can see, the ISO changes when I change this dial on the top. Okay. Once you are in your menu section, which you get to by hitting the menu button down below, you can go to your camera settings, over to photo shooting menu, and down the bottom of the first page is ISO sensitivity settings. Now, you could do this every time and go in and change to on and off. So if I change to on here and I get back out, my ISO is now flashing auto, and I can change that with exposure compensation, the dial that is on the top there. Dial it up, goes brighter, dial it down, goes darker. If you're used to changing your exposure compensation a lot, you might find that this dial, as good as it is, might take too long and be too awkward to change on the fly. So there is another way to set your camera up so that you can change your exposure compensation really easily. And anyone that's set this up on your Z7 or Z6, you'll know that you can assign exposure compensation to the ring. So I'm going to show you that, but also you might want to flick between auto ISO and manual ISO. Now there isn't a quick way to do that on the Zfc, but you can set up a quick way to do that by assigning that to one of the buttons. And I'll show you how I've done that. I've actually assigned it to the top menu item and to this front button right here on the front, and it means that when I click on this button on the front of the camera, it goes straight into my menu settings and straight into that top menu item, which I've set to auto ISO. So I can click and toggle between on and off. So leave that on for now. To set up your menu items and to make that the top menu item, just go into this section in your camera here and add item. Go into photo shooting menu, and you need to go and find that, which is ISO sensitivity settings. Of course, it's already in my menu, but when you add that and you go back, you'll see it up the top there. You can change the order of the items in your My Menu. What you want is for this to be right up the top, because then when you change your settings under Pencil, Controls, Custom Controls Shooting, and you go to that button on the front, which is the one that's showing up right now, you set that to access top item in my menu. So because that is set, when I press this button here, it goes straight into Auto ISO Sensitivity Control. Now with that set up, I can then have the camera change the ISO while I change the aperture and the shutter speed manually. But what if I want to change the exposure compensation really quickly and I find that this button here is a little bit slow for my method of working? Well, you can set exposure compensation to the ring. The first thing you need to know is that it won't work unless this dial is set to C. Now, once that dial is set to C, your exposure compensation can change based on turning this ring. Now, I've already set this up. I'll show you how to set that up on your camera. So go to Menu, go to the Pencil, to Controls, Custom Controls Shooting, down to the ring that is closest to the camera, and click on Exposure Compensation. So you have the option of manual focus, of it changing the aperture, and for me, I like it to change the exposure compensation. Now if I come out of that and I turn my ring, I'm able to change my exposure darker or lighter just with the ring, which is a very smooth way of working. The next thing that I wanted to set up on my camera to match my Z6 and my Z7 was back button focus. Again, it wasn't as easy to find as I thought it would be. So I want to take you through how to set up back button focus. Back button focus means using a button on the back of the camera to lock the focus in, rather than the shutter button on the top. Out of the box, you'll use the shutter release button, which is on the top of the camera, to focus by pressing it halfway down, and then to take the photo by pressing it all the way down. Back button focus is focusing with the button on the back of the camera, not the shutter, and using that to pre-focus and then taking the photo. It does give you a whole lot more control, and it is worth giving it a go if you haven't. Now, if you're used to back button focus, you'll want to know how to set it up on the Zfc. The first thing you want to do is actually disengage this shutter release button from autofocusing. So you want to turn off AF autofocus on the shutter release button. Then what will happen is it will take the photo, but it won't affect the focusing, which you'll assign to the back button. We go into Menu, go into the Pencil menu, go to A for autofocus. Now you'll run down this menu item until you get to AF activation, which is A6. By default, the shutter AF is on. Turn off the shutter and have it AF on only. Once you've done that, then you need to set that back button to be the one that focuses. One of the challenges I had when I started setting this up is that the menu item that this was selected on was on the second page, and I didn't realize there were more options available on the previous page. Let me show you what I mean. This is default. So when you go in, you see these options. What you need to do is actually scroll up and go to AF on. Now this button will do the focusing for you. So if I get out of that, so when you press the button on the back, it will focus, and the button on the front, the shutter release button, will take the photo. So that's how you set up back button focus. Okay, when I first tried to set up this camera, I wasn't sure how to preset the shutter speed on video mode separately to the shutter speed on photo mode. When you are in video mode, the ideal shutter speed in Australia is a 50th of a second. It matches in with the hertz that you're shooting in, the lighting. So you could go a 50th of a second, a 100th of a second, and so forth. Shooting on 25 frames per second, or 50 frames per second, or even 100 frames per second. You basically want to match that up with the shutter speed. In the manual mode, you can set it to a 50th of a second. And on the top, you'll be pointing that little arrow to the 30. But what happens is, when you switch to camera mode, the shutter speed actually changes to a 30th of a second. If you change that on the dial, the shutter speeds on the photo menu are they jump between 30th of a second, 60th of a second, 1/25th of a second. That doesn't work in Australia. You really need to set it to a 50th of a second or a 100th of a second to make sure that you don't have any conflicts with your lighting and the hertz in the room. I struggled with this because every time I changed between photo and video mode, I had to change the dial on the top. And then I worked out how to set it up so that in video mode, it's a 50th of a second, and in photo mode, it's whatever I left it on last, which might be 1/25th of a second, 200th of a second, whatever it was that I wanted to shoot the photo in. What you actually need to do is turn this dial to where it says third step. When it's on that third step setting, you're able to change the ISO with the other dials on the camera. So more like the Z7 and the Z6. I'm in camera mode at the moment, and I can use the dial on the back of the camera to set the shutter speed. I'm going to set that in camera mode to 1/25th of a second. Then I'm going to switch over to video mode. As you can see, it's already a 50th of a second. It's locked down on what I preset it before. And to change the shutter speed, I can use that back dial as I need to. When I switch back to photo mode, it's on the last setting that I had it on. That setting is really ideal if you are switching between photo and camera work and doing a lot of hybrid work. You want to be able to separately set the shutter speed so that it matches what you're doing for each, because video and photography are a little bit different in that respect. Now I've got this beautiful little camera set up just like my Z7 and my Z6, so I can easily pick it up and work with it without thinking. I hope this helps you to set your own camera up in whatever way is best for you. There's so many options with the custom settings, and you can really tailor it to your own needs. So I hope this has helped you find those little areas that you were stuck on when you took your own Zfc out of the box. Enjoy shooting!